Welcome to Melanated Rising, where we inspire, uplift, and ignite Black creatives, all while changing the narratives around Blackness. What does it mean to exist Black in this world today with our many intersections? That's exactly what we explore: the challenges, the beauty, and the brilliance. Every episode is a look at what is possible when Black creatives stand in our undeniable power. Welcome back to another episode of Melanated Rising. I am your host, Kristen Iris, an artist, coach, speaker who specifically works with Black creatives. And today I am going to be talking to you about the dreaded imposter syndrome, which is, part of probably every creative's life. In fact, every person's life who's doing anything that pushes their comfort zone or trying to innovate or even just share your story. Imposter syndrome is all over the place. So today also in particular, I'm going to be sharing the nuances of imposter syndrome for Black folks in particular. Now, imposter syndrome is something that really does affect, I think it affects everybody. Everybody experiences it in some way, but for Black people in particular, there are certain things that inform our experiences and the way that we navigate the world that also play into feeding that imposter syndrome. So I'm going to talk about some of those particular nuances, and you can see what resonates with you, what feels like it's been part of your experience as well, and have a better understanding of what's going on for you when certain things are coming up as you are navigating the work that you're doing. So we will dive into all of that. Now, imposter syndrome, what is it? Imposter syndrome is really that feeling that you get like when you're doing something, it can really be anything, whether it is your art, whether it's a business, whether it's in a corporate environment, whether it is applying for a job, but it is the feeling like, oh, am I good enough for this? Are they going to find me out? Like you might be a little bit of a fraud or something like that. But this feeling like you're not sure if you're good enough, not sure if people are going to see you as good enough, whether people are going to second guess you, something like that. All of those different kind of feelings can come up. In particular, for those of us who have work in like particular endeavors or work that you are pursuing, passion projects that you are pursuing, those are definitely places where it tends to come up. And it can be in really big ways, like you're about to do a performance or you're about to step into a particular role or a job and you're like, oh, am I going to be able to do this? But it can also happen in really small ways, like if you are sitting at your computer and you're waiting to publish a blog post on your own website or on Tumblr or anywhere else, and you are feeling that pause, like, oh, should I hit publish? Maybe I should wait. And that's a place that feels, a little bit smaller, that you might struggle with imposter syndrome, but it comes up in all kinds of places. So story time, because I like to share personal experiences here with you guys. My coaching business has evolved over time too. So in the beginning, when I first started with online, my like online business and in particular with coaching, I was really focused on writers. Okay. So fiction writers in particular, because I was a fiction writer. And although my coaching is not about at that time was not about how to write, it wasn't about how to publish. It was really about what are the things that are getting in your way, like imposter syndrome. So even though that was my focus, there was a little bit of imposter syndrome on, well, I'm a writer, but I haven't been published yet. Like, so are people going to look to me as a coach for writers because I haven't been published? And even though my expertise and what I was actually teaching and sharing and guiding people through was not the writing at all, it was the coaching, there was still a little bit of that imposter syndrome of, are people going to understand that? I have to make sure that that it's clear? Are people going to say, oh, well, what does she know? She didn't even publish anything yet. Um, so that was the very beginning of kind of my coaching journey, which I quickly got over and was like, let me just be clear. Let me just be clear about what I do. And those who don't, like those who find value in what I'm doing are gonna, they're going to follow, and those who don't or who are caught up on whether or not I'm published, then they're not going to follow me. Now, about a year after that, oh, a little more than a year, a little more than a year after that, I had started switching my focus, and it wasn't at that point it wasn't writers, it was really more entrepreneurs. And that whole summer, so it was the summer of 2017, I was really focused on women entrepreneurs and bringing in issues of patriarchy and misogyny and how that plays into the things that we internalize that hold us back. Now, towards the end of that summer, I was really feeling like I wanted to make another shift, and I really wanted to focus on women of color, specifically women of color. Um, and part of that had to do with part of the struggle in the shift was, wow, I have a lot of white followers. I'm connected to a lot of white entrepreneurs, and once I start making this shift, all of those people that are following me and people that I've talked to that were considering working with me, those people are no longer people that I'll be working with, because I'll be shifting to working with women of color. Um, but the imposter syndrome, so this is an interesting place where imposter syndrome came up for me, is in particular with trying to connect with more Black women entrepreneurs, is where I started to have the imposter syndrome. And it wasn't around my coaching, and it wasn't around what I do, it was around my Blackness. It was around actually being another Black woman and feeling like I had to actually pinpoint it, because I was like, why do I feel so nervous about going into these Black female online spaces, these Facebook groups primarily, but Facebook groups that were geared towards Black women entrepreneurs. And I'm like, why do I have so much anxiety around this? Why am I so nervous around this? And I'm like, I have no problem going, well, generally speaking, I felt much more comfortable going into groups that were predominantly white, I guess. When I think about it, yeah, I guess those groups were predominantly white, than to go into groups that were specifically for women of color or Black women entrepreneurs. And I realized that it was because I was afraid that the Black women that I would connect with, or the Black women, going into those spaces, that the Black women would feel like I wasn't one of them, like I wasn't Black enough, which is all part of the Oreo complex that I talked about a few episodes ago. Now, once I realized that, part of what happened in that moment was I was like, "Oh, I'm still living with this story about not being Black enough." And not only am I still living with this story, but I am now putting this projection on other Black women that they are different from me. It's almost hard for me to describe, because I can't even really pinpoint what it was, but it was just this idea that like they would feel like I was different from them. Um, you know, that I speak differently, which is, I mean, not true, but because that was something that I had been told by people, by Black people, was like, oh, you talk white, you like, why do you act like that, or things like that. And because from like a young age felt this kind of rejection from other Black people, I realized that this is something that I was carrying into my business with me. And I was like, oh, this is not actually a real thing. I This idea that this fear that I have that they're going to reject me, that's me. That's not about, like, that's about me. That was something that I was carrying. I'm like, I'm putting a projection on how other people are going to respond to me that like is not fair, and who knows if it's true, because I don't really know how they're going to respond to me, because I have to show up first. And so that was an interesting place where imposter syndrome had come up as like, are they going to see me as good enough, or, and by good enough, it was really black enough to guide them through the things that are in their way. I was not doing business coaching, but again, with what are the internalized things? What are the things that you have, like your internalized oppressions that are still showing up for you, that are still holding you back, and clearing those things out of the way. So I realized what was going on. I realized that imposter syndrome. I was like, what the heck is happening here? But I had to look at it and actually like ask myself, like, why do I feel so apprehensive about this? What is with this like strange idea I have of black women in my head and that they're going to reject me? And it's not that it was interesting because I had already had so many calls with other black women through that summer. Like as much as I was in these white dominated spaces online, I was still actually attracting. I was attracting a wide variety of people, but I was definitely attracting black women entrepreneurs as well, and quite a lot of them were. In terms of like my entire list of people that I was having calls with, quite a lot of them were actually black women. So this, I already had evidence that this was not a true story, but it still stirred up that imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome still creeps up. Of course, it's going to creep up as I stretch myself, especially right now, stretching myself in different avenues in my life. And but now I recognize it. Now I know where it comes from because I've gotten into that deeper story. And that's what I am going to guide you guys through a little bit here. Now that I've shared a story from my life and how it showed up in a way that was really surprising for me in the moment, I want to talk a little bit about what imposter syndrome can actually look like in terms of things that you might expect, but also things that you might not expect. Okay. So the first way is procrastination. Procrastination is a big sign of it's a big symptom, I will say, of imposter syndrome. And procrastination, like starting a project but not finishing it, knowing that you have a project or a task to do and you're putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, or having something done, having it ready, but not actually doing that final step, like that final execution of whatever it is, putting it out in the world, publishing it, whatever it is. So not taking that step, or knowing there are certain things that you have to do and just putting it off. Even if you're someone who, like me, like I schedule everything, is like you might find yourself continuously moving it later and later in the calendar, moving it further and further away. Like, okay, I'll get to it on Friday. And then Friday comes along, okay, I'll get to it on Monday. So procrastination is a big, big, big symptom of imposter syndrome. And close to procrastination is distraction. So distraction looks like you sit down to do something and then you're like, oh crap, I got to go do the laundry, and you get up and go do the laundry. Or before you know it, you picked up your phone and you're on Facebook or you're on Instagram scrolling and you didn't even realize that you just distracted yourself. Like, oh, let me go check my social media feed. Okay, so distraction, finding other things to interrupt what you're actually doing that pull you away from the task at hand. So while procrastination is like putting it off, distraction can be a way that you do that. And it's finding yourself doing all these other tasks. Another way that distraction comes up is in the form of other people asking you to do things. Okay, now what we I say we because I'm thinking women in particular. Women in particular are really socialized to put everyone else's needs first. And so it can be a hard habit to break, to do things for everyone else before yourself. So that is its own issue entirely. I could do like a whole episode on that. But if you are someone who does that, you can end up using the things that you finger quotes, like quote, have to do for someone else as a distraction and an excuse to not do whatever your project or endeavor or the task is that is giving you that imposter syndrome. So that's another way that it can show up. Now, content consumption, like constant content consumption and education, is another way that you can actually, it's another symptom of imposter syndrome. So what I mean is, and this is not to say that you shouldn't educate yourself or that you should not learn things that you need to learn. You absolutely should. But if you are constantly consuming content, taking content in, learning things, oh, let me do this course, oh, let me do this workshop, oh, let me do this webinar, oh, let me do this thing, but you're not actually taking action in your project, that is another symptom of imposter syndrome. It's the I have to learn more, I have to learn more, I have to learn more, I have to be better, I have to be better, I have to get credentials. I mean, not that you shouldn't get credentials if that's something that you actually like need in your field, but like I have to do this, 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 and this before I can take action, before I can take the step, before I can launch my business, before I can, put my creative work out there, whatever it is. It's I have to do all this learning, 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 but you're learning, 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 and you're getting all this knowledge, you're gaining all this knowledge, and you're not doing anything with it. And that is often because of imposter syndrome, because you still feel like you're not good enough. Um, and then another part, another way that imposter syndrome shows up is through perfectionism, which can actually tie into the content consumption, is that I have to be better, I have to be better, I have to know. But perfectionism is vile. It's vile. Um, the way it can show up as a symptom of imposter syndrome is I feel like I'm not enough. Someone's going to tell me I'm not enough. I'm not going to put it out until it's perfect, because when it's perfect, then it'll be good enough. When it's perfect, then I'll be good enough. So we will sometimes equate the output of our work with our own worth and our own value. And this is where imposter syndrome is actually rooted in, is in fear. So it's not actually um, that you're not good enough. It's not actually that you need to do X, Y, and Z to be better. I mean, sometimes you do have to improve or reach, a certain level of knowledge or things like that. But the imposter syndrome is actually rooted in fear. And often it's a fear of not being good enough, or a fear of rejection, or a fear that you're actually unworthy. And it's tied to a deeper belief. So a lot of times people look at like their perfectionism or procrastination or getting distracted. They look at these things and they think that thing is the problem. Those things are not actually the problem. Those things are the symptom of the deeper underlying problem, which is whatever your root fear is. And that root fear is showing up in your life as procrastination, as imposter syndrome, as perfectionism, as not finishing projects. It's showing up in different ways. It's showing up as not speaking up. It's showing up as not sharing your story. It's showing up as not doing the work that you really feel called to do. It's showing up in different ways because deep down, you're still living from a place of this deeper fear that you're holding. And I'm going to dive in a little bit later about how to actually deal with that deeper fear and explore that so that you can overcome imposter syndrome and so you can navigate it. Because here's the thing, imposter syndrome being rooted in fear, it's always going to keep coming up. Because fear is going to keep coming up. So fear will show up in different ways. Fear is part of the human experience. It just is. And as you start taking yourself to new heights, to new levels, stretching yourself into new things, you're going to have fears that come up. But when you actually learn how to navigate those fears, when you learn how to respond to fear in a way that is empowering versus disempowering, then you are able to move through. And the imposter syndrome, the fear, those things won't stop you. They'll be part of the journey that you get to navigate through and move past versus it being a block in your way. But before I dive into those steps, I want to talk in particular about the nuances of where imposter syndrome can also be fed for Black people in particular. So, in the United States, which is where I am and where I'm from, um, because of transatlantic slave trade, our literal value as Black people was our work output, our value as a not even a human being, because we weren't really considered human beings, but our value in the world for centuries was our actual labor, was our actual work output, which meant that if we were not of use, we were not of value. And that carries into today and carrying a feeling of I have to be useful. I have to be useful to other people or I'm not of value and I'm not worthy. And this is like the deeper down things that can come up or be going on in your subconscious. And these things are fed by the ways our society still operates and the messages that we get in media, in the conditionings, the social conditionings and social norms that we live out. As I mentioned earlier, women, and in particular, Black women have been socialized to take care of everyone around us. And so when we have that social conditioning, that is a social conditioning that feeds the you are of value when you are of use. And if you are not of use, if you are not taking care of everyone, you are not showing up as a Black woman the right way. And if you are not showing up the right way, if you are not of use, if you are not taking care of people, you are not of value. Okay, so these are ways that we get this social conditioning that reinforces some of these ideas that really is what our history is based on. Um, and it's not, I just want to say it is not just something that is in the States because slave trade was a lot of places, but speaking from someone in the States and where our social conditioning and societal, literally every societal system is rooted in the birth of like you know not the birth of but the slavery and racism and white supremacy, which are what this country is founded on. Really all the systems are bred from that, and then our social conditioning comes out of that as well, which I'm seeing a lot of this changing in society, which is so great. And we need to keep doing that work, and part of doing that work is recognizing where your conditioning actually comes from. And so these are some of the places. So in conjunction with slavery and our value being our use and our work output, another reason for why Black women end up often depleting ourselves and are we really have to like learn self-care and learn what self-care even means and how to do it, because that's not something that on a societal level we're really taught or is really even seen as a value, and it's something that is becoming much more of a value. But in conjunction with that, we had centuries of being seen and treated as less. Like Black people historically of actually being seen and treated as less, of our humanity being erased, like being treated as animals, not as human beings. And that carries over into today. So like I just said, we have social conditioning. We also have the nuances of our beliefs and societal beliefs and the way other people in society, non-Black people, see Black people. That is carried over from continuously for centuries seeing us as less. And honestly, that's still really the case today. It's not to the same level as when we were as chattel slavery, but the seeing us as less is something that is it's rampant through society. Um, and that shows up, for example, in the ways that accomplishments and contributions of Black people in history are notoriously overlooked or erased or diminished. Okay, a lot of the things that we use today that people just assume were invented by or discovered by or created by white people because white is sort of like the default, Just like when a lot of times when you read a book, white is the default, and you don't know someone's another race unless they're mentioned as another race. So a lot of times people will assume that things were created by white people when a lot of those things, a lot of the technology, technological advancements, the things that have been invented, a lot of these things were actually created by Black people. But that gets erased and it gets overlooked, and we don't learn it in school. Okay. And so we have to go and discover these things, but it's not just us as Black people discovering, oh, this rich, beautiful history of the accomplishments of Black inventors and artists and doctors and architects and all of those different things in every field, seeing how we have excelled. These things are also not seen by non-Black people unless they're doing the research and looking into it. They're not really seeing that either. So because there is a historical erasure of our accomplishments, that carries over into today with the way that society has a lower expectation of what Black people can do, with the exception of athletics. And even in athletics, sometimes we are erased. Look at Serena Williams. Um, so because society and non and again, this is a blanket statement. This is like an overall general statement. I am not saying every individual in society thinks this way, but in general, we are conditioned and taught to have lower expectations of what Black people can do. So with that, because we don't have this widespread knowledge of all the accomplishments that we have actually had in society and history, we have society has a lower expectation. And then how that translates to us as individuals navigating the world is our skills get second guessed by outside people. Okay, our skills get second guessed, our knowledge gets second guessed. A lot of things about us get second guessed. And then what that leads to is us second guessing ourselves. So, me as an individual, second guessing myself, second guessing how I should show up, what I should say, things like that. That's how it shows up. And then you get that imposter syndrome. And so you second guess yourself, or you feel like you have to work extra hard to prove yourself because society is second guessing you, because we have this historical erasure of Black people's accomplishments, because we have centuries of being seen and treated as less. So all of these things are historical elements and societal conditioning that contributes to the way we have to navigate the world and the way we then engage with our own work and our own endeavors, and even the people that we want to connect with around those endeavors, in feeding that imposter syndrome that then becomes that block to doing so. So, like I said, everyone has every kind of person experiences imposter syndrome. But these are some of the particular nuances to why why Black people and Black creatives can experience imposter syndrome, and where some of that comes from and how that leads us to show up. So now that you've got this context, you can kind of look at, okay, are there ways that this has been affecting me? Are there ways that, like, oh, the ways that people have responded to me, or the ways that society portrays Black people is feeding into the way I'm showing up? So you can look at those things, and now we're going to get to what you can actually do about your imposter syndrome. What can you do about the distractions, about the procrastination, about the perfectionism? Okay, like I said, all of those things are symptoms, and the root is the deeper down fear. So the first thing that you can do is start to catch your distractions. What are your particular behaviors around imposter syndrome, around feeling like you're not enough, that you exhibit that actually feed into that? Because we all have our different things. I gave you guys some examples of how it shows up, but look at what shows up for you. Do you find yourself suddenly picking up your phone and scrolling your social media feed when you are supposed to be doing, when you've set yourself to do a task? Are you distracting yourself? Are you like, oh, well, I'll just watch one episode of Netflix on Netflix because, it'll help me chill out and then I'll come back to it. That's when I used to do. I used to do that a lot. Okay, I'm just gonna watch one episode. 5 episodes later, I'm like, shit, I didn't do what I was supposed to be doing, and now I'm hungry. So pay attention to what your distractions are and what your behaviors are around imposter syndrome. When it starts to stir up, how do you respond? How do you act? What are even some of the thoughts that you have? Because thoughts, and I don't know how I didn't mention this earlier, but thoughts are a huge symptom of imposter syndrome. It shows up as like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, there's no way. No one's going to read this. Nobody likes this. No one cares what you say. All of those things, huge symptom of imposter syndrome. It's the way your internal dialogue is shaping up around the work that you're doing. And so start paying attention to the thoughts that you have. Start paying attention to your responses to those thoughts, your actions that you're taking or not taking. That's going to let you know the patterns that show up for you as far as your imposter syndrome. Now, when you start paying attention to those behaviors, you get to start catching yourself in it. And when you do, sit in it for a moment and be like, okay, what's really going on here? What am I really afraid of? And keep asking that question. So this is something that is actually really important in a lot of different areas, not just in imposter syndrome, but when fear comes up, is a lot of times, you're in the moment and you're like, okay, well, what am I afraid of? Like, what's going on here? Oh, I have a fear of failure. And then people stop there. They stop there. That's the surface. You have a fear of failure. What the fuck does that even mean? What is failure? Because failure is subjective. What is failure to you? Or is your standard for failure based on an idea that somebody else has given you or that society has given you? And why does failure matter? Why does that even matter to you if you fail? What does that actually mean? Is where that exploration needs to keep going. Is what are you really afraid of? Fear of failure doesn't really mean anything. What does failure mean to you? What is it? What will it mean for your life? What will it mean about you as a person? That's what you really need to be exploring, because that is what's going to let you know where your deeper fear is. So you keep asking the question, well, what would that mean? Why does that matter? Where does this come from? What am I really afraid of? And you keep peeling back the layers. So you can't just stay on the surface. Fear of failure, that doesn't mean anything. Fear of success, what does that mean? So keep digging into it. And when you get to like the deeper fear is really something that is a fear about yourself. I'm afraid that I'm not worthy enough. I'm afraid that I'm not enough. I'm afraid that people won't see me. It's all rooted in like a deeper down fear about you. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be imposter syndrome, right? So like I said, the first thing is catch your distractions, start paying attention to your patterns around imposter syndrome, how you respond to it, the thoughts that you have, and then explore what's really going on. Keep digging down into the deeper fears that are coming up for you. And this involves an amount of truth speaking, being really honest with yourself. And then as you start like really getting into that deeper fear and understanding what's really going on, that's where you can get really good at that pattern disruption. Because when you find yourself doing your distractions in your thought patterns, et cetera, and you actually know the deeper fear that comes from, it gives you the power to be like, wait, I don't need to let this fear control me. When you don't know what the fear actually is, when you don't know what that deeper fear is, you don't really know how to navigate around it, because you don't even know what you're navigating around. It's just this deeper fear that's coming up that's blocking you, and it looks like imposter syndrome. But when you get into that deeper fear, you could say, oh, I know what's happening right here is that I have this deeper fear that I'm actually unworthy, and that's what's surfacing. And then that gives you the power to be like, no, I am worthy. to do things and remind yourself how you're worthy. And that's where you get to create a change. So that pattern disruption is when you see yourself in those thought, when you get into those thought patterns, when you start picking up your phone, when you head to the couch to put on Netflix, those things that you do, whatever they are, that is where you get to be like, wait, I know what I'm doing. This is actually my fear. This action right here, these thoughts, this behavior, this habit, this is actually a fear response. And then you can choose to do something else. And that's kind of the key part to it. Recognizing when you're going into those behaviors that fuel the imposter syndrome, that are a response to that deeper fear, disrupting the pattern and making a different choice. Guess what? You're not going to do it every time. You're just not. You're not going to do it every time. But the more and more you recognize your patterns, the more and more you actually pause and think in that moment, the more and more you will choose a different action. It might be like, you know what? I am going to sit here at this computer and I'm not going to get up until I hit publish on the blog post. It might be, okay, I am not going to turn on Netflix and you're actually going to get back to the task at hand. It might be telling someone, you know what? I can help you with that in a couple of hours, but right now I need to finish this. Honoring your work and the time that you set aside for your work. It can be just pausing the thoughts and being like, you know what? Those thoughts are not helpful and they're not even true. And then choosing a new thought pattern. All right. So it's a pattern disrupt and giving yourself that moment to make a different decision. And when you don't make a different decision, you don't make a different decision. Let it go. You lost the battle that round. That's okay. Every time you do make a different decision, that is a win. And that's something that you get to celebrate. And the more and more you disrupt that pattern and recognize, oh, this is a fear response, this is my imposter syndrome, this is this deeper fear at work, and choose something else, the more and more you take back your control from that fear. And that emboldens you and empowers you to take new steps and to reach new heights and to take yourself to new levels or your work to new levels, because you know what that deeper fear is that's holding you back, and you can actually disrupt that pattern. Now, those deeper fears, and these are things that I do with my coaching clients, is really guiding you deeply through this process. But those deeper fears are really, really powerful, and they're very, like, they are root fears. Okay, they even become beliefs, like deep down root beliefs within you. And those can be really, really hard to change. And so it takes time to change and it takes a process. That is exactly why I coach, is to help people through that, because it can take a really long time. And when you have someone to guide you and to give you the tools, it can streamline the process so that you then have a process to come back to as you go to the next level and new things come up and new blocks come up. So this dealing with the actual deeper fears can be really challenging. On really unlearning them or learning new beliefs, changing those deeper beliefs is a process, but this is something that is going to really clear the path for you. And so I hope that this really gives you a better idea of what's really going on when you have imposter syndrome, what imposter syndrome can look like in ways that you may not expect, or things that you didn't quite realize, like, oh, I'm not doing this thing because I actually want to. I'm doing this thing because I have imposter syndrome. Um, which actually it actually just made me think of something else I want to add here in what imposter syndrome can look like that you wouldn't expect, is actually pursuing something that you don't even really want to do, or pursuing your thing in a way that you don't want to do it, because that's what people expect and that's what other people are doing, and because you kind of want to like keep up with the Joneses. So quick example of this is when I first started really doing online business and online coaching. I was trying to write articles and put articles on my on my blog, and like I fucking hated it. I'm a writer. I love writing. I love writing books. I love writing stories. I love writing even screenplays. I do not love writing articles. In fact, I hate writing articles. It even depletes my writing energy so that it makes it hard for me to write the stuff that I do like writing. But that's what was expected. People are like, oh, you got to blog and write articles and put up this content so people can come to your website. And I was just like, I don't like doing this. But that's what I had learned. And that's also what I thought would be expected. That's what you're supposed to do when you have an online business. It's bullshit. Things that you learn as you navigate online business or even business in general. And so there was this, I have to put up this content so that I can look like an expert, but I really hated doing it. And once I really acknowledged that not only did I hate doing it, but it was also depleting my writing energy and my creative energy from the things that I really wanted to be using it for, I stopped. And I started looking at, okay, how do I actually want to run my business? What are other ways that I can do this? So that's just a quick example of like doing things because it's supposed to look good, or that's what people expect, or that's how you're going to prove yourself. And it may be things that like you just absolutely loathe doing. But you think it's going to help get you to like whatever the place is, the place that you want to be with your endeavor, whether it's a business or other work that you're doing. So I hope that these things have been helpful for you in being able to understand your imposter syndrome, understanding how it can look, and understanding even like the deeper things and historical things and societal things that contribute to your imposter syndrome, like as a Black creative. And I always feel like having that deeper context helps me understand, oh, this is also part of how I have to navigate the world. And this also shows up as imposter syndrome. Like this is where, one of the things that it's coming from. And then I hope that the tips that I gave you on what to do to help navigate imposter syndrome and navigating the deeper fear that it comes from so that you can actually take more action. I hope those were helpful. As a bonus, another thing that is really, really helpful is to cultivate people around you who will support you. Okay, people who have your back, people who are like, yeah, I see what you're doing. This is awesome. People who will cheer you on. That is really, really powerful. And if you can do that, whether it is online or in person, like in real life with people then definitely do that. Find spaces where people will support you. And then also it's helpful to limit contact or set boundaries around the way you engage with people who specifically don't support you. Like sometimes there are people who are like, oh yeah, that's cool what you're doing. And they're not necessarily like really, really supportive, but they're not unsupportive. But there are a lot of people will have others in their life who are like talking down about what you're doing, who are like, this doesn't make sense, or I don't get it, or who will just make you feel not good about it. You want to either limit your contact with those people or set boundaries around how you engage with them. That's a little bonus. That could be a whole discussion itself, but that is a little bonus. Cultivate people around you that will support you. Set boundaries with people who bring you down around the work that you're doing in particular. And that will also help to create a better mind space and a life space, actual in real life space for you and your work to really flourish and to be able to be put out in the world and to have the impact that you really want to have in the world. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe so you get new episodes, and please leave an honest review on iTunes because it is the best way to help others find the show and to get this out to more people. If you would like to help support this podcast, because I am a solo podcast producer, I invite you to join my Patreon page at patreon.com/melanatedrising. You can pledge a monthly amount. They are low amounts, and that will help to support me in doing the show and offset the cost of producing the show as well. So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode, and always remember to stand in your Black creative power.